In this lesson, we'll be creating a save system that will be used by our main menu's continue button. To begin, we are going to create a set of directories. So the first one's going to be save system. Then under that, we're going to have scripts. And then under that directory, we're going to create a directory called runtime. And then we're going to create a directory called core. Now within this directory, we're going to create a new class called file manager. And it's going to implement a static function called save to binary file. And that's going to take in a path and an object. Then we are going to instantiate an instance of the binary formatter class. And then we are going to open a file in create mode, which will create it if it doesn't already exist. Now in our try catch, we are going to try serializing our object. And in the event there's an error, we're going to log a warning saying that we failed to write the data at that given path. And then in the finally block, we're just going to close the file. Now we're going to create another function called load from binary file that is going to take in a path, and it's going to modify a object called data. So like before, we're going to instantiate an instance of our binary formatter class, and then we are going to open the file at the path. Then in our try catch, we're going to set the data variable by deserializing the file. And then if there's an error, we're going to log a message saying that we failed to load the file. And we have to set the variable in all cases, and so we set it to an empty object. And again, in our finally block, we're going to close the file stream. Now we're going to create a new interface called iSaveable. And this interface is going to be generic. And so it's going to implement a property called data, as well as a function called load that takes in a variable called data. Now we're going to create a new scriptable object called GameData. And it's going to be in our save system. And the default name of the file is going to be GameData. Now we're going to create a variable for the file name. And then we're going to create a variable to determine whether the data has already been loaded. And we make sure that we set it to non-serialized because we don't want the scriptable object to store it such that it persists between play modes. Now we're going to create a variable called path, and we're going to serialize it because we want it to be saved by the scriptable object, but we don't want the user to see it, so we include hide inspector. And then in our onValidate function, we're going to set the path to the application persistent data path combined with our file name. Now we're going to create a dictionary where the keys are strings and the value is a object. Next, we're going to create a new directory called data. And then within there, we're going to create a class called scene data. We're going to ensure that it is serializable. And then we're going to give it a public string variable called ID. Now we're going to define a save function that takes a savable and it will be of type scene data. So we're going to set the dictionary value to the name of the type. Then we're going to create a load function, again, of isavable scene data. And then we're going to check whether the data has already been loaded. And if it hasn't, then we are going to log a message. Next, we're going to create a function called load from binary file. And we're going to check to see if the data hasn't already been loaded. And so we're going to create a new public variable called hasPreviousSave, which is just going to return whether the path exists or not. So we're going to use that down here. So if the path exists, then we are going to call FileManager.loadFromBinaryFile and pass in our path. And then we're going to set our data variable accordingly. Then if the data has already been loaded, we are just going to log a message saying it's already been loaded. Now we're going to define a function called SaveToBinaryFile. And within it, we are going to call FileManager.SaveToBinaryFile, pass in our path and our data. Now we're going to open up our SceneLoader class, and we are going to make it implement the isavable interface. And so we are going to return a new instance of scene data, and the ID is going to be equal to our current scene references asset ID. And then in the load function, we are going to create a new scene reference with that ID. Next, we're going to create a new serialized field for our game data. And we're going to create a serialized field for the save data channel, which doesn't exist yet, so let's go ahead and create it. We're going to create a new directory called channels. And then within there, we're going to create a new scriptable object called save data channel. And while we're at it, we're going to create the load data channel as well. So the load data channel is going to have a public event called load. And then it's also going to have a public function that invokes the load event. And then our save data channel will have a public event called save. And a public function called save that invokes the event. Now we're going to import our save data channel, and we're also going to create a variable for our load data channel. Then in our onEnable function, we are going to listen for the save event, and then we are going to execute a function called onSaveData. We are also going to listen for the load event on our load data channel. And in our onLoadData, we're going to call GameData.loadThis, and then in our onSaveData, we're going to call GameData.save.this. And then in the onDisable function, we're going to stop listening to the events to avoid memory leaks. Now we're going to create a new mono behavior called UI Manager. Then we're going to create a serialized field for our game data. Next, we're going to create a serialized field for our save data channel. And then another one for our main menu scene. And we are going to create a variable for our load seed channel. Now we're going to create a save function where we first load the data from the binary file, and we do that just in case the dictionary wasn't previously populated. And then we're going to call save. And then we're going to call save to binary file. Now, just to test this, we are going to check whether the spacebar was pressed, and if it is, then we are going to save and then load the main menu scene. In Unity, we are going to create the instances of our load and save data channels. Then we are going to open up our manager's scene and create an empty game object. and add our UI manager mono behavior to it. Now we're also going to need to create an instance of our game data scriptable object. So we're going to drag that into the inspector and proceed to select all of these scriptable objects. Then we are going to do the same thing for our scene loader. Next, we are going to create a new scene. And we're going to call it Forest. And the reason we do this is so that we have different scenes to differentiate between our initial tutorial scene so that we know whether saving is working, and we'll just add a capsule to make it different. If you guys remember, the tutorial has a plane. Now we're going to make sure that we make our game data addressable, and then we give it a file name. So I'm just going to call it mysave2. And then we're going to want to ensure that all of our other channels are addressables. Now in our UI manager script, we are going to create a new scene reference for our forest scene. And again, to test, we're just going to trigger a scene load event when the Q key is pressed. Now we're going to open our main menu script. And we are going to get a reference to our game data as well as the load data channel. Then rather than automatically setting the enabled of our continue button to false, we are going to check whether we have a previous save. And then when the continue button is clicked, we are going to call a function called continue previous game save. And then within here, we're going to call load from binary file. And then we're going to call the load function on our load data channel. In Unity, we are going to open up our main menu scene, and then we are going to set the properties. And then we're also going to open up our managers scene. Oh, looks like we don't need to do anything there. So we're going to open up our entry point scene and press play. Now if I select new game and press Q, we can see that we open our new scene. If I press space, it goes back to the main menu. If I press continue, it returns to the forest scene. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a new function within our game data scriptable object. We're going to call it delete save. And I'm realizing this should probably be private because we don't want any class to be able to delete our save data. So we're first going to check if we have a previous save, and if we do, then we're going to call file.delete and pass in the path. And then we are going to make this a context menu so that we're able to execute it within the editor. So if we click in the top right corner, we can select delete save. Now if I press play, the continue button should be grayed out again.